The Second World War, the historical lie. For decades, we have been constantly flooded with films, documentaries, and books about the Second World War. The images of bombed-out cities, battles, and human suffering are deeply and firmly anchored in our collective memory. Yet while we know these symptoms of the war in every detail, one fundamental question still remains unanswered. What was this war really about? To me personally, this constant focus and media presence of the World War has seemed increasingly strange in recent years. One might think people would want to forget this terrible time. Yet interestingly, it is constantly recalled. And despite all the reporting, films, and documentaries, it was ultimately never clear to me what this war was really about, what purpose it served. We see plenty of action and drama, but we don't become any wiser. It almost feels as if this media flood of World War content is a deliberate cover-up. People are kept busy with emotional stories and scenes of action so that they do not ask about the systematic changes. In public perception, the Second World War is often portrayed as a so-called good war, a fight against fascism, in which the Western democracies and the Soviet Union ultimately came together to defeat Hitler. But the common portrayal overlooks the long-term consequences of the war. The World War brought about far-reaching modernization both in the Western world and in the Soviet Union, and within a very short time it led to truly unprecedented advances in the automotive industry, aviation, electronics, communications, and nuclear technology. Developments that firmly cemented economic and military superiority over the rest of the world for many decades to come. One could even say that during the war years, the Western world and the Soviet Union went through an intense industrial and technological drastic cure. And finally, the Western world was also politically and structurally centralized and integrated. From fragmented nation-states emerged an integrated, centralized world order that still exists to this day. The crucial question is, were these profound transformations really just a natural consequence of the war, or were they, from the very beginning, the actual goal? What if the World War was not a tragic accident of history, but a deliberately staged event to transform the world? Were we witnesses to the greatest deception in modern history? Did millions die in a war whose true intention is still being concealed to this day? Was the war a means to an end for a far-reaching social and economic transformation? This documentary puts forward the thesis that the Second World War was not a historical accident, but was deliberately brought about and carefully and intentionally staged to achieve precisely this transformation of the world. A transformation that continues to shape and define global structures to this very day. In the following first chapter, we will look at the technological and industrial developments during the Second World War. The second chapter deals with the new institutional world order that emerged in the final years of the war and still exists to this day. Conclusion: Technology and Industry in World War II. The Second World War was more than just a massive military event. It was a historical turning point in which the Western world underwent an industrial and technological drastic cure and an unprecedented wave of modernization. This change cemented its technological and economic superiority over the rest of the world for decades to come. In the face of the war, technological innovations were pushed forward, industrial production capacities were radically expanded, and entire societies were shifted toward armaments production. This wartime infrastructure formed the essential basis for the Western nations' worldwide economic dominance in the years after the war. The Western world dominated the global export market through technological superiority, and the industrial capacities expanded during the war. This Western dominance was not the product of spontaneous innovation or free market forces, but the result of a planned, war-driven transformation that continues to shape the world today. For all the focus on civilian industrial and technological dominance, one crucial aspect must not be overlooked. The technological and industrial transformation did not apply only to civilian uses. The massive military innovations of the Second World War, above all nuclear weapons, but also rocket technology, modern tanks, long-range bombers, and jet aircraft, laid the foundation for the long-term military dominance of the Western powers, including the Soviet Union, over the rest of the world. These military achievements carried seamlessly into the post-war era and were strategically expanded during the Cold War. It was here, in the military realm, that it became most strikingly clear how fully the Second World War had created a technological platform whose strategic value was secured for decades. We will return to this development and its lasting significance later in the chapter on the Cold War. Conclusion: Second World War. The historical lie. At the beginning of this documentary, we asked what the Second World War was actually supposed to accomplish. The answer to this question may emerge in the pattern that becomes visible when we look at historical developments through the lens of our formulated theses. The Western world and the Soviet Union, or to put it even more clearly, the entire white world, went through an intense industrial and technological crash course. This truly unprecedented modernization firmly cemented their technological and economic dominance over the rest of the world for many decades to come. The Second World War was a significant period of technological innovation, rapidly accelerated by the pressing demands of the conflict. The technologies, industrial capacities, and production methods developed during the war ultimately had a very beneficial long-term side effect for our world. After the war, they were transferred into the civilian economy and laid the foundation for global export dominance. However, the long-term strategic importance of the military innovations from the Second World War must not be overlooked. These innovations not only created military superiority during the war itself, but also served after the war as a technological platform for sustained military dominance of both the West and the Soviet Union over the rest of the world. The arms buildup during the war laid a highly advanced technical and industrial base. This base was further developed after the war in the following Cold War, whose dynamics we will analyze in the next chapter. At the same time, a political and structural unification of the Western world took place. Sovereign nation-states gave way to a rules-based order shaped and maintained by international organizations, supported by military, economic, and institutional leadership structures. It appears as if the chaos caused by the war was deliberately used to enforce this new global architecture. The white world was thus prepared for a new global era. Meanwhile, in the East, a second independent power bloc emerged under the leadership of the Soviet Union. The Eastern and Western blocs together formed a new bipolar post-war order. This brings us to the crucial question: were we witnesses to the greatest deception in modern history? Did millions die in a war whose true purpose remains hidden to this day? Personally, I believe that this is exactly the case. The World War was used as an instrument to carry out a deliberate plan. The white world was rapidly upgraded technologically, industrially, and militarily within a short period. And under the umbrella of international organizations, a new world order emerged. Of course, it is very difficult to conclusively prove our suspicions. We have no clear, irrefutable documents available that would definitively demonstrate the World War was a deliberate means to an end. Such documents will most likely never be accessible to ordinary people like us. But when we look back over the past several decades, at the time of the World War and later the Cold War, a full and clear picture emerges that makes our theses appear quite realistic. When taking a broad macro perspective, Without getting lost in details such as battles, death, and destruction, a picture emerges that, in hindsight, appears quite suspicious. If we consider this accumulation of technological, industrial, and societal changes and become fully aware of the significant long-term benefits they brought to our world, it leads us to suspect that these changes did not arise merely as a spontaneous reaction to the war, but were deliberately and carefully planned. Perhaps in the end, it is only a feeling, and the final proof for our theses is lacking. But not all feelings deceive, and one does not always need clear evidence in hand to know that something is wrong, and perhaps has been for a very long time. This documentary offers a new perspective on the Second World War and the important question of what purpose it truly served. A perspective that may be closer to the truth than any other explanation offered so far.